So good day, Miss. So we'll be tackling about the primer on the Magna Carta of Disabled Persons. So I'll be with Argawanon, Araneta, Botero, Cogtas, Macapas, Rebalde, and Rondina. So for definition of terms, for purposes of this act, these terms are defined as follows. So for disabled persons, these are those suffering from restriction or different abilities as a result of a mental, physical, or sensory impairment to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal for a human being. Then impairment is any loss, diminution, or aberration of physiological, psychological, or anatomical structure or function. Then disability shall mean a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more physiological, psychological, or anatomical function of an individual or activities of such individual. Then this also means that disability is a record of such an impairment or being regarded as having such an impairment. Then handicap refers to a disadvantage for a given individual resulting from an impairment or a disability that limits or prevents the function or activity that is considered normal given the age and sex of an individual. Then for rehabilitation, it is an integrated approach to physical, social, cultural, spiritual, educational, and vocational measures that create conditions for the individual to attain the highest possible level of functionality. Then for social barriers, so this refers to the characteristics of institutions, whether legal, economic, cultural, recreational, or other, any human group, community, or society which limit the fullest possible participation of disabled persons in the life of the group. Then social barriers include negative attitudes, which tend to single out and exclude disabled persons and which distort rules and interpersonal relationships.
So for employment, equal opportunity for employment. No disabled person shall be denied access to opportunities for suitable employment. A qualified disabled employee shall be subject to the same terms and conditions of employment and the same compensation, privileges, benefits, fringe benefits, incentives, or allowances as a qualified able-bodied person. Sheltered employment. If suitable employment for disabled persons cannot be found through open employment as provided in the immediately preceding section, the state shall endeavor to provide it by means of sheltered employment. In the placement of disabled persons in sheltered employment, it shall accord due regard to the individual qualities, vocational goals, and inclinations to ensure a good working atmosphere and efficient production. Apprenticeship, subject to the provisions of the Labor Code is as amended, disabled persons shall be eligible as apprentices or learners, provided that their handicap is not much as to effectively impede the performance of job operations in the particular occupation for which they are hired, provided further that after the lapse of the period of apprenticeship, if found as satisfactory in the job performance, they shall be eligible for employment. Incentives for employers. To encourage the active participation of the private sector in promoting the welfare of disabled persons and to ensure gainful employment for qualified disabled persons, adequate incentives shall be provided to provide entities which employ disabled persons. Private entities that employ disabled persons who meet the required skills or qualifications, either as regular employee, apprentice, or learner shall be entitled to an additional deduction from their gross income equivalent to 25% of the total amount paid as salaries and wages to disabled persons. Vocational rehabilitation, consistent with the principle of equal opportunities for disabled workers and workers in general, the state shall take appropriate vocational rehabilitation measures that shall serve to develop the skills and potentials of disabled persons and enable them to compete favorably for available productive and remunerative employment opportunities in the labor market. The state shall also take measures to ensure the provision of vocational rehabilitation and livelihood services for disabled persons in the rural areas. In addition, it shall promote cooperation and coordination between the government and non-governmental organizations and other private entities engaged in vocational rehabilitation activities. Vocational guidance and counseling. The, the Department of Social Welfare and Development shall implement measures providing and evaluating vocational guidance and counseling to enable disabled persons to secure, retain, and advance in employment. It shall ensure the availability and training of counselors and other suitably qualified staff responsible for the vocational guidance and counseling for disabled person. For education, access to quality education, the state shall ensure that disabled persons are provided with the adequate access to quality education and ample opportunities to develop their skills. It shall take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all disabled persons. It shall be unlawful for any learning institution to deny disabled person admission to any course it offers by reason of handicap or disability. The state shall take into consideration the special requirements of disabled persons in the formulation of educational policies and programs. It shall encourage learning institutions to take into account the special needs of disabled persons with respect to the use of school facilities, class schedules, physical education requirements, and other pertinent considerations. The state shall also promote the provision by learning institutions, especially higher learning institutions, of auxiliary services that will facilitate the learning process for disabled person.
So, state assistance or the Magna Carta for Disabled Person is a landmark legislation in the Philippines that aims to promote and protect rights of well-being of individuals with disabilities. So, one key aspect of law is the provision of state assistance to ensure the equal opportunities and participation of persons with disabilities in various aspects of life. So the law mandates that the government create programs and services that address the specific needs of disabled persons, including education, employment, rehabilitation, and social services. So like for example, the law emphasizes the right of persons with disabilities to education. So the state assistance in this context involves the development and implementation of inclusive education programs, accessible facilities, and appropriate support services. So the schools are required to make reasonable accommodation to ensure the students with disabilities can access and participate in mainstream education opportunities, and this including providing assistive technologies, modifying teaching methods, and ensuring physical accessibility. Promoting quality education for disabled persons. So in section 12, which is access to quality education, so the state ensures that disabled persons are provided with access to quality education and ample opportunities to develop their skills. It shall take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all disabled persons. It shall be unlawful for any learning institution to deny a disabled person admission to any course it offers by reasons of handicap or disability. So the state shall take into consideration the special requirements of disabled person in the formulation of education policies and programs. So it shall encourage learning institutions to take into account the special needs of disabled person with respect to use the school facilities, class schedules, physical education requirements, and other pertinent considerations. So in section 13, which is assistance to disabled students, the state shall provide financial assistance to economically marginalized but deserving disabled students pursuing post-secondary or tertiary education. Such assistance may be in the form of scholarship grants, student loan programs, subsidies, and other incentives to qualified disabled students in both public and private schools. Lastly, which is the Section 17, State Universities and Colleges. If viable and needed, the state's university and college in each region or provinces shall be responsible for first, the development of material appliances and technical aids for the disabled person. Next is the development of training materials and vocational rehabilitation and special education instructions. Next is the research on special problems, particularly the visually impaired, hearing impaired, speech impaired, and other orthopedically impaired students, mental retarded, and multi-handicapped, and others, and the elimination of social barriers and discrimination against disabled persons. And next is the inclusion of special education and disabled, which is the SPED course in the curriculum. So the national government shall provide the state universities and colleges with necessary special facilities for visually impaired, hearing impaired, speech impaired, and auditory impaired students. It shall likewise allocate the necessary funds in supports of the above.
So next is for the health component. So the National Health Program. So the Department of Health, in coordination with the National Council for the Welfare of Disabled Persons, shall institute a national health program which shall aim to attain the following: prevention of disability, whether occurring prenatally or postnatally, recognition and early diagnosis of disability, and early rehabilitation of the disabled. Rehabilitation centers. The Department of Health shall establish medical rehabilitation centers in government provincial hospitals and shall include in its annual appropriation the necessary funds for the operation of such centers. The Department of Health shall formulate and implement a program to enable marginalized disabled persons to avail free rehabilitation services in government hospitals. Health services. The state shall protect and promote the right of health of disabled persons and shall adopt an integrated and comprehensive approach to their health development, which shall make essential health services available to them at affordable cost. The national government shall provide an integrated health services for the uh, disabled persons, include but not limited to the following: prevention of disability through immunization, nutrition, environmental protection and preservation, and genetic counseling, and early detection of disability and timely intervention to arrest disabling condition, and medical treatment and rehabilitation. The Department of Health shall field medical personnel specializing in the treatment and rehabilitation of disabled persons to provincial hospitals and, when viable, to municipal health centers. It shall also train its field health personnel in the provision of medical attention to disabled persons. It shall further ensure that its field health units have the necessary capabilities to fit prosthetic and orthotic appliances on disabled persons. Next, auxiliary services. So, auxiliary social services, the state shall ensure that marginalized persons are provided the necessary auxiliary services that will restore their social functioning and participation in community affairs. Towards this end, the Department of Social Welfare and Development shall develop and implement programs on auxiliary social services that respond to the needs of marginalized disabled persons. The component of such a program shall be as follows: A. Assistance in the acquisition of prosthetic devices and medical intervention of specialty services. B. Provision of specialized training activities designed to improve functional limitation of disabled persons related to communication skills. C. Development among disabled persons of a positive self-image through the provision of counseling, orientation, and mobility. and strengthening daily living capabilities. D. Provision of family care services geared towards developing the capabilities of families to respond to the needs of the disabled member of the family. E. Provision of substitute family care services and facilities, therefore, for abandoned, neglected, abused, and unattached disabled persons who need custodial care. F. Provision of aftercare and follow-up services for the continued rehabilitation in a community-based setting of disabled persons who were released from residential care or rehabilitation centers. And lastly, G. Provision of daycare services for the disabled children of preschool age.
For telecommunications, we have broadcast media. Television stations shall be encouraged to provide a sign, language insert or subtitles in at least one newscast program a day and special programs covering events of national significance. We have telephone services. All telephone companies should be encouraged to install special telephone devices or units for the hearing impaired and ensure that they are commercially available to enable them to communicate through the telephone system. Free postal charges for the disabled. Postal charges shall be free on the following: A. Articles and literatures like books and periodicals, orthopedic and other devices, and teaching aids for the use of the disabled sent by mail within the Philippines and abroad, and aids and orthopedic devices for the disabled sent by abroad by mail for prepare, provided that the aforesaid items are for personal purposes only, provided further that the disabled person is a marginalized, disabled as certified by the Social Welfare and Development Office of the local government unit concerned or the Department of Social Welfare and Development.
Accessibility. The Magna Carta of Disabled Person emphasized the importance of creating an accessible environment for disabled persons. It mandates the removal of architectural and transportation and communication barriers that hinder the full participation of disabled individuals. It also requires the incorporation of accessibility features in the public buildings, transportation system, and other facilities. Political and civil rights. This section recognizes the political and civil rights of disabled persons. It ensures the right to participate in political and public life, including the right to vote and be elected. It also prohibits discrimination based on disability in the exercise of civil and political rights and call for the promotion of disability awareness and sensitivity among government officials and the general public.
Discrimination and unemployment. So discrimination and employment, no entity, whether public or private, shall discriminate against a qualified disabled person by reason of disability in regard to job application procedures, the hiring, the promotion, or discharge of employees, employee compensation, job training, and other terms, conditions, and privileges of employment. The following constitute acts of discrimination: I. Limiting, segregating, or classifying a disabled job applicant in such a manner that adversely affects his work and opportunities. Next is the using qualification standards, employment tests, or other selection criteria that screen out or tend to screen out a disabled person unless such standards, tests, or other selection criteria are shown to be job related for the position in question and are consistent with business necessity. Next, utilizing standards, criteria, or methods of administration that first have the effect of discrimination on the basis of disability or perpetuate the discrimination of others who are subject to common administrative control. Next, providing less compensation such as salary, wage, or other forms of remuneration and fringe benefits to a qualified disabled employee by reason of his disability than the amount to which a non-disabled person performing the same work is entitled. Next is favoring a non-disabled employee over a qualified disabled employee with respect to promotion, training opportunities, study and scholarship grants, solely on account of the latter's disability. Next, reassigning or transferring a disabled employee to a job or position he cannot perform by reason of his disability. Next is dismissing or terminating the services of a disabled employee by a reason of his disability unless the employer can prove that he impairs the satisfactory performance of the work involved to the prejudice of the business entity. Provided, however, that the employer first sought to provide reasonable accommodations for disabled persons. Next is failing to select or administer in the most effective manner employment tests which accurately reflect the skills, aptitude, or other factor of the disabled applicant or employee that such tests purports the measure rather than the impaired sensory, manual or speaking skills of such applicant or employee, if any, and excluding disabled persons from membership in labor unions or similar organizations. Next is the medical examination for employment. Employment entrance examination. Upon an offer of employment, a disabled applicant may be subjected to a medical examination on the following occasions. First is all entering employees are subjected to such an examination regardless of disability. Next is information obtained during the medical condition or history of the applicant is collected and maintained on separate forms and in separate medical files and is treated as a confidential medical record, provided, however, that supervisors and managers may be informed regarding necessary restrictions on the work or duties of the employees and necessary accommodations. Next is first aid and safety personnel may be informed when appropriate if the disability may require emergency treatment. Next is government officials investigating compliance with this act shall be provided relevant information on request. And lastly, the results of such examination are used only in accordance with this act.
So for discrimination in the public transportation, so it shall be considered discrimination for the franchisees or operators and personnel of the sea, land, and air transportation facilities to charge higher fare or to refuse to convey a passenger his orthopedic devices, personal effects, and merchandise by reason of his disability. For discrimination in the use of public accommodation and services, so no disabled person shall be discriminated on the basis of the disability in the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations of any place of public accommodation by any person who owns, leases, or operates a place of public accommodation. The following constitute acts of discrimination are as follows. So first, denying a disabled person directly or through contractual, licensing, or other arrangement the opportunity to participate in or benefit from the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations of an entity by reason of his disability. So second, affording a disabled person on the basis of his disability directly or through contractual, licensing, or other arrangement with the opportunity to participate or benefit from a good service, facility, privilege, advantage, or accommodation that is not equal to the afforded to other able-bodied persons. And last, providing a disabled person on the basis of his disability directly or through contractual licensing or other arrangement with a good service, facility, advantage, privilege, or accommodation that is different or separate form that provided to other able-bodied persons unless such action is necessary to provide a disabled person with a good service, facility, advantage, privilege, or accommodation, or other opportunity that is effective as that provided to others.
For penalties for violation, any violation of the provisions of this agreement shall be punishable as provided in section 1 to 12 of this code. To the extent applicable, each day any violation shall constitute a separate offense. Any person who violates any provision of this code for which another penalty is not specifically provided shall, upon conviction, be subject to a fine not exceeding $500 or by imprisonment for a period not exceeding 60 days or both.